My name is Frank Aibogo. I'm publisher of BusinessDay. Let me take the delight in welcoming you all to this webinar. These are very interesting times. Some say unprecedented times. And we think that we have lined up a very exciting list of panelists for this conversation this afternoon. Before we start, let me thank MTN, our partners who have been so gracious to provide the technology support and logistic support for this webinar. Looking at the registrations, I see diplomats registering from different embassies to join this call, former ministers, and we've had people join this call from as far away as Singapore. A clear testimony to how important this matter is at a very crucial time like this. As I said earlier, we have a very interesting lineup of speakers. We have Dr. Isweli, who has served as chairman of NNPC, joined the oil industry at 24. Kiari Buka is here with us. He has been chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group.
Hello.
Atedo Peterside, chairman of ANAP Foundation, and also chairman of the foundation's COVID-19 task force, has joined us.
Thank you.
We also have Professor Chidi Odekanlu, who is visiting professor at Harvard University Law School, and rose to prominence in the days of June 12th when he joined others to take on the military government then. Of course, this afternoon, we will be led by no other person than Professor Enase Okonedo, who very interestingly is Dean of the Lagos Business School. That's not where I'm headed. She teaches lectures in decision-making and problem-solving. There are indeed mountains of decisions ahead of Nigeria to take. So let me, without any further ado, hand over to Professor Okonedo.
Thank you, Frank, and let me join in welcoming everybody. Without much ado, I'd like to launch into the discussion. You know, before COVID-19 emerged, we've been faced with what I'll describe as weak economic recovery, beginning from the oil price shock of 2014, which led to the recession from which we had only just started to emerge. Now we're grappling with not only the combined effect of economic, but also monetary and indeed social challenges, all of which are having a huge impact on growth. And therefore, I would like to begin by asking each of the panelists to just share from their own unique perspective, what is it that led us to this? And I'd like to call on Mr. Atedo Peterside, who recently established the ANAP COVID-19 think tank. So I believe that he can give us perhaps a brief overview of what led us to the situation in which we find ourselves in now, where we're grappling to cope with the myriad number of problems that face us.
Yes, thank you, moderator. I think let me start by answering a question that you hinted at, which is that COVID-19 affects the whole world because it's a pandemic. So what you're really asking is, how come Nigeria appears to be among the list of countries that were caught completely, not unawares, but not very well prepared? Indeed, just this morning, I came across an article by Jeffrey Sachs pointing out that WHO gave every country the same information. So the difference is what each country did about it. So we know that this thing began in China. Some countries have been very successful: South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, and in Europe, to an extent, Germany, in terms of their low death rates. So what was it that some countries, giving many countries the same information, how come some were very ready and to be able to respond, while some, including Nigeria, are struggling to catch up? I think because Nigeria, along with others, made some mistakes. In Nigeria, I can count 5 major mistakes that we made. One, I still suspect that we prepared. When I say we as a nation, I don't point fingers because we're all involved. As a nation, we underestimated the threats and we had an Ebola mindset. So we were preparing for something small, only to discover that this one is Spanish flu, which killed 400,000 Nigerians in 1918. The second one is that we were still unprepared, so we were allowing in international flights that were bringing in most likely positive carriers from Europe. Look, in a typical week, Nigeria had 260 international flights. Even if they brought on average 100 passengers, and we know many planes carried much more, that would be 26,000 people arriving on our shores each week, with a good percentage of them being carriers of COVID-19. So, having been late in the game, the first thing we had to do was to stop the international flights, because as more flights come in, they compound a problem we cannot handle. Then also, our lack of preparedness meant that we did not have the ability to test those in the population who were coming in, or those who were here who were coughing, to know who had COVID-19 and who didn't. So it's all interwoven. So the lack of preparation meant that our testing ability was very limited. And then we now got hit by the crimes that we have committed all these years, in the sense that we don't have an organized society. We can't identify every Nigerian. And so when some people flew into Lagos and Abuja and they bolted, they don't have all of them don't have a national ID number that you can immediately locate them everywhere, like in some countries. And then also finally, our inability to look after the poor handicapped us in the fight, because whereas China and others would immediately feed the poor who were locked down, give them all the supplies they needed free, we are now left trying to appeal to the poor to stay locked down in an environment where the government cannot really support them. Please, I even want to replace government with the rich, because no rich man needs permission of government to feed the poor. So we are struggling with the problem that we have 80 million Nigerians that are hungry. You find 80 million is the figure from NBS estimated, who are declared as poor. So whether we succeed in this fight or not will depend on how we can feed those 80 million Nigerians and keep them in a way and manner and means of living and style of living, with masks and so on, that they can have their basic needs met and will not infect the rest of the population as we struggle to bring them back to work. So I think I will stop there, because I've run through the problems, how we were caught late like a few others, and how our inability to respond immediately. The final thing I will say is that there are three pillars in this fight. One is the medical. The other two are communication and governance. Our weaknesses in governance and communication are also now contributing to our inability to quickly ramp up on the medical side, which for years we neglected. I think I will stop there for now.
Well, thank you very much. I think that you've given us a very good overview that enables us to segue into what I hope the other panelists will be contributing on. So I'll move to Dr. Imo Itzweli. You know, Mr. Peterside a few minutes ago attributed the situation we find ourselves in to a lack of preparedness there. I think that with the situation that we are faced as a nation, in which we largely rely on oil revenues, we see a situation that I describe as a double whammy, with decreasing oil revenues due to the geopolitical conflicts that we have recently experienced, as well as reduced demand due to a contraction of several global economies there. Could we have done anything better with our oil revenues to prepare for this situation?
Well, there are a number of things we could have done better, but let me put it in proper perspective. As far as the oil industry is concerned, there are many things we have not done well, and we continue not to be doing well at this time. But I see this whole period of COVID-19 as a preparation and gearing us up to do better after COVID. Now, where are we? We are currently producing just under 2 million barrels per day. And from 1st of May, after the settlement OPEC meeting of last Sunday, OPEC Plus, we shall be having a quota of 1.4 million barrels per day from 1st of May. We have a lot of gas reserves, about 5.7 trillion cubic meters. Of this, about 44 billion cubic meters per year is being marketed, of which 28 billion only is exported. And the main export mechanism is through NLNG, which is doing very well. You know, as you know, NLNG is owned 49% by Nigeria and 51% by others. The IOCs are doing quite well. Most of them are increasingly offshore, and the Nigerian players are mostly onshore. Now, the main thing is we have not invested in the industry as we should have over the recent years. And why not? Many companies have complained that this is due to the uncertain and unattractive investment environment. The major reason for this, of course, is for those who might remember, for 20 years now, we've been trying very hard to get our reform package ongoing, essentially the PIB. And it's actually sad that after 20 years, we still do not have a reform package ready. Many countries, small and large, have already gotten their own act together. And until we get this act together, we're going to have a deficit of investments in the oil industry. And because of that, we are not replenishing what we're producing. And we do need to have this new regime, investment regime, in place as quickly as possible. Now, we need to rebuild the oil and gas industry so that we can play our role internationally. And unless we do that, we have a problem on our hands. The industry thrives best when private sector is the driver of the whole system. Right now, the government should set up an operating environment whereby all they should do is just regulate, give instructions, and allow the private sector to operate. But that is not what we have. Instead, what we have right now, the government is a player, it's an instructor, the government is a regulator, and at times this causes conflicts. We do need to change this. We need to learn from other successful producing environments as to how they've done it successfully. For example, if you look at arguably the best oil industry company in a country in the world is the United States. You might argue about that, as well as Canada. Now, they have no national oil companies. Even the UK that started with the British National Oil Company earlier on soon learned their lesson. And what did they do? They took off being up. France, Italy, Germany, way back, they had their own national oil companies. But these have metamorphosed into private sector companies. We all know about, we all hear, and they are active players in Nigeria as well, Total and ENI. Now, some countries about our level, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brazil, Venezuela, they all have national oil companies. The Middle Eastern countries are also doing the same thing. But we need to learn from countries that are doing better than what we are doing. Essentially, it must be private sector driven. And if it is not private sector driven, we will have problems with investment. Now, let's take a look at the NLNG model. That has been very successful. The Nigerian government, through NNPC, owns 49%. Shell and Egypt, ENI, and Total, they own the remaining 51%. Now, this has worked very well. And recently, as we know, the NLNG returns have been very useful to us in these particularly difficult times. Can we not model on this and leverage on it so that in future we have models like this? Just imagine if NLNG had been totally private, 100% private, perhaps the returns would have been a lot more than what it is. We also have joint ventures and we have PSCs. Time will tell. In future, we need to compare the NLNG model with the joint venture models and the PSC models and see which pays us better. But this is discussion and argument for another day, not for today. So as far as what have we done, the question and answer put to me, what have we done well and what have we not done well? Well, the NLNG model is one that we have done well in. The PSCs and the JVs, the IOCs are moving offshore, the Nigerians are taking over, moving onshore. We need to improve what we're doing. We need to have an investment regime that will encourage players to come and invest a lot more in the country. Let me stop there for now, because there's a lot more one can say as we move along.
Great, thank you very much. So you have mentioned the fact of private sector involvement, and this leads me to call on Kyari Buka. Kyari, you once were, if I may use that, at the helm of the NESG as the executive chairman. From your perspective, this economic crisis that we're facing, some people have attributed it to the failure to create a credible and effective engagement process between the private sector and the government. Is that true? Because I thought that was what the NESG is about. So perhaps you want to draw in from your experience there. Would you say that this effective engagement between private sector and government has been ineffective, and that has contributed to the situation we face right now?
Yes, Prof. Thank you very much. These are my personal views.
You're gone.
Seems like I'm having a problem.
Yeah, it looks like.
Staying on. These are my personal views. So I want to put a disclosure out there. This is not the views of NESG.
Okay.
My own perspective is that governments historically have been quite cynical about any private sector organization that comes in to engage them. I think to a certain extent, the NESG has proven to be a credible partner in terms of discourses related to the economic development of Nigeria. This particular government also had that in the first year of its coming into power. And all of those lack of trust or the trust building exercise may not have been quite fully cemented. But I do see, since I have left the board of NESG, that a certain level of engagement goes on. This is a pandemic, or rather a black swan. Actually, for the case of Nigeria, it is two black swans swooping in. First of all, it's the pandemic itself, and as a result of the pandemic, since the pandemic is affecting both the demand and supply side of the global economy and the supply chain, it has impacted us even worse than most other countries because of the effect of our dependence on oil as our source of revenue, talking about the federal government. Now, initially, an engagement of private sector organizations would have gone a long way because some of the candid discussions would have taken place, even if it is privately to be had, so that panic is not there, and then the kinds of palliatives that are going to be put forth, both on the financial side as well as on the economy side, on the vulnerable and the poor in the country, would have resulted in the kinds of things that we see elsewhere. Today, the fintech ecosystem, which I am involved in, have done quite a number of things, including lending to millions of people on a daily basis by one company or two or three. They have been doing that for the last 2-3 years. Now, these people seem to have access to the vulnerable, to the people that are at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, when you just copy and paste things like locking down and so on and so forth, you would end up actually shortchanging yourself economy-wise, because 80% of our employment is in the informal sector. 60% of our economy or of our GDP is still in the informal sector. Now you tell them to stay at home and you don't give much of response or palliatives to them. You end up basically loading the arsenal of social unrest, really, rather than social distancing. Social distancing could result in other social ills that we may not want to see down the road. I think the engagement of private sector and the public sector is critical, but the advice has to be candid. The conversation must be candid in terms of what we need to do. The second thing, which actually may come down the road or later on in our conversation, is post-COVID-19. What should we be doing as a nation? And I think the more the engagement with the organized private sector, the better it is going to be for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kiari. So indeed, you have alluded to the role that the informal sector play, the important role that they play in this economy by their contribution of between 60 and 65%. Atedo also, in his opening, alluded to the fact that we have locked down without feeding the poor and without supplying them with what they need. And therefore, I would like to invite Prof. So Chidi, you come from the perspective, I believe, of civil society. And one of the greatest concerns is really with the informal sector. and the loss of income that's occasioned by their inability to go out to a living. And we have seen this play out in the pockets of unrest, if I may, and criminality across the country. Underlying all of this, there seems to be a lack of trust in the government's ability to take care of them. Perhaps it is real or it is perceived. And it leads me to this social contract between the people and the government. Is this broken? Why are people out on the streets struggling? Is there a lack of trust in the government's ability? And is there any credence to this view of the people that we find out on the streets every day? So I'd like your views on that, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Nase, and good afternoon. Let me say, I think I'd rather not frame this as a contest between civil society and evil society. I like to look at this as a dialogue of human society and how we organize it in a disorganized country. Pandemic response invariably is about governance. And the standard recommendation by the WHO under the regulations of the latest edition, of course, is 2016. Test, trace, and treat. But you can't test, you can't trace, and you can't treat without an underlying structure of governance. And I like the way that Kiari framed it. Imo as well and Atido have all come from the point of view of government-private sector relations. But you cannot have private sector without citizens, consumers, or communities. You know, there are forces in this business. You know, you've got, so for every company, you need communities, consumers, and citizens. And then government should provide a context in which that interaction takes place. That does not exist in our context. And I think that's the underlying problem that is manifesting itself here, that government is collapsed. It doesn't exist. And I don't think it's a question of capacity. I think in Nigeria, actually, it's worse than capacity. It's a matter of care. Most sadly, from the point of view of the average Nigerian, most of the people who should run government don't care. Let me illustrate this. Nigerians had to beg the president to address us in this situation. And we even had to enlist foreigners to go and beg the president to address us on this situation. This is the same man who, when he was running for elections last year, addressed Nigerians 4 times in 1 week. And right now, he was missing and we had people who represent him, who speak for him, tell us that it is a matter of his style, that his style does not involve interacting with Nigerians or talking to Nigerians, right? And now he's done 2 broadcasts, 29th of March and 13th or thereabouts of this month, without actually saying much, other than, we really don't care about you guys, figure it out for yourselves. And so what is happening? We've got 2 kinds of COVID in Nigeria. There is a federal COVID, which is Abuja, Lagos, and Ogun State, and there's state COVID. The rest of you sort yourselves out. Now, so there is no strategy. The absence of a strategy is resulting in what I call biomilitarism, because we've got government that only thinks in terms of enemies that it can shoot, bribe, or imprison. Now, COVID is not something you can shoot, you can't bribe it, you can't imprison it. And so what are we doing? We are shooting our people. Over the last 13 days, we've killed at least 18 people in Nigeria, and we are told that COVID has killed 11. So we are killing our people before COVID has the opportunity to kill them. And this is the real problem we have got. And we are recommending maladapted solutions. As Kiari said, you know, lock yourselves up, social distance. How are you going to socially distance in Ajegunle or in Mosquito Village? We have not thought about our society at all. We are recommending hand washing in a country in which over 60% of the people don't have access to water. And the government is not talking about how we get water to our people. And I could go on, but really we are in a situation in which government is required to prove that it is run by responsible people who care. And apart from Lagos State, and I'll repeat, apart from Lagos State, and with a minimal provision for Ogun State, it is difficult to see really that we have government that cares. And so when people go to liberate food, we should not call them criminals. And this is the note on which I end. I think we should recognize the fact that they are responding to an elite that have proven to be mostly criminal in the way they've run the country. And the people now are resorting to DIY, do it yourself, to try and protect ourselves. But let the conversation take place. But this, honestly, is what I believe, speaking as an ordinary citizen.
Well, thank you very much, Chidi. I like the fact that you are ending with the fact that it appears that there are criminals on both sides. I will come back to you about possible solutions to this. But I'd like to come back, talking about solutions, I'd like to come back to Atedo. In the wake of COVID-19, you set up your think tank and you identified 7 items as being of critical supplies. And in your opening, you did allude to the 3 pillars that you have identified as being critical in this fight. Could you explain what these things are? And really, since we're talking about solutions, and perhaps share your views on how we're doing as a nation with respect to those identified pillars and possible solutions.
Okay, I think you're asking me to also mention the 7 items.
Yes, please.
Okay, I will run through them very
Yes.
I will run through them very quickly. The 7 items, number 1, test kits. Without the test kit, you cannot test, treat, and trace. Number 2, molecular laboratories and skilled personnel. Without the laboratories, you cannot get a test result from the test kits. Number 3, surgical face masks and cloth face coverings and all that stuff, which we need, the mask, to avoid spread of the disease. Number 4, personal protective equipment for medical personnel plus more medical personnel. Number 5, respirators and ventilators and things that help the elderly when they go down with COVID-19. Number 6, some drugs that have yielded promising results, because that may well be a savior. We're talking about hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin and a few other drugs. Number 7, the safety net. That is the 80 million Nigerians who are poor. Whom you look after them well, they will cooperate with you and make your social distancing and or lockdown as best as you can make it. Please, I heard Chidi very well. The only thing you can do with social distancing, in fact, the low-hanging fruit there is to eliminate things like unnecessary gatherings of persons, people flocking together when there's no need to. So if you call a very big function and you invite the whole village, they will turn out to eat and they will infect each other. So we talk about social distancing or lockdown to an extent possible. And it needs to be localized, but there's nothing like one size fits all. Social distancing in Borno means a different thing from social distancing in Mbaise in the southeast, because Borno has plenty of land. Not even that, you may find that the issues there are different. So each community must get involved in deciding things like what are the market days, how do we move around, how do we bring in food. Even Lagos cannot feed itself anyway. So food must come into Lagos. So you must have a strategy for bringing in essential supplies and items. And now to mention the other 2 pillars, because these 7 items, apart from the one on safety net, have to do with must-win battles on the medical side. But it is the lack of governance and authorization, is the poor governance, historical poor governance standards and poor communication that make it more difficult for us to quickly ramp up and meet needs of these 7 items. Please, in fact, the most important reason for our 7 items was to stop people doing wasteful spending, knee-jerk reaction on items 8, 9, and 10, which are all items that Nigeria already has in large quantities. Because the person who is caught with his pants down will always be tempted to get involved in knee-jerk reactions to show that he's doing something. And we're saying, please, 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 this is too serious. It's not the time to play games. These are the 7 items we need. Everything else we have. I repeat, everything else we have. Even communication. It's not true that communication must be only by a head of state. if President Buhari speaks on Monday, which he did, we expect to hear voices like Chidi, like Imo. We expect to hear voices like Kiari, like Frankai Bogu to carry the message. That's why I argued from the first day that the number one thing that is critical, given our weak governance and poor communication historically, is that we must build an elite consensus. Nothing can be more confusing if the elite are singing different songs. Some are saying go left, some are saying go right. If we have a consensus, take an example. The first elite consensus was on international flights. We knew that we could not continue to allow in 260 flights a week. And when the elite joined with their voices, government did the right thing and shutting those flights. Because if you cannot test, trace, and treat those that are here already, why compound the problem by bringing in 260 flights a week, which if they each had an average of 100 passengers, is 26,000 new passengers every week, of whom God knows 30% are probably positive. And also our testing capacity is still very low. In the president's speech, he said it was 1,500 a day that they can test. Multiply that by 7 and think of how many people need to be tested. So the lockdown and social distancing were a strategy to keep people roughly where you can find them, while you ramp up the testing capacity so you can get to test them. But if you cannot still test after 4 weeks of lockdown or social distancing, then you're in deep trouble, because sooner or later you have to let them out. And when you let them out, they will be all over the place. And even if you can then test, it's too late because you are trying to catch a moving target. This is not China, where they have AI and they can locate every Chinese person almost from his face. When he goes past a street camera, there will be an alert saying that's him, and they'll pick him up. Here, if I go to my village, even I'm lost immediately. So so that the whole idea of the social distancing and lockdown was to give us a chance to ramp up the medical responses. Not that anybody thought they would be magic in themselves. It's that to slow down the movement, remove unnecessary gatherings, which is already happening. Some people reported empty mosques in some places, empty churches over Easter. Believe me, if those churches and mosques had been full, by now we might have been like Italy. Italy was unlucky because at the time it came to them from China, they were probably the first European country that was still preaching things like democracy, human rights, freedom of movement. So they made the mistake of not trying to lock down and embrace social distancing. Before it got to Italy, think about geography. It got to South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, but those guys understood this is serious business. So they locked down, they did social distancing, and they contained the disease. Germany learned a bit from Italy because they saw what was going on in Italy. And Germany is the most organized society almost in Europe. Strong, effective leadership. Or the country was ready in the best of times to handle an emergency. So if a country is ready for an emergency, when an emergency comes, they already have all the responses available because they organized their country to handle the normal plus an emergency. We in Nigeria never organized our country. Please, I say we, including the private sector and the government, state and federal, everybody. We never organized our country in the best of times to be able to do simple things like give a handout to all the 80 million people. So now we're having to think about how to do it in an emergency. I said this morning on AIT that the beauty of it is that we don't really need the government to look after the 80 million who are poor. I have statistics from the MBS, roughly 180 million Nigerians, of which 80 are poor. If you accept that the next 20 can only feed themselves, that leaves 80 million more who have the ability to feed themselves and can probably all each feed one extra Nigerian. So the 80 million richest can feed the 80 million poorest, taking on one person a day, and we would have solved the problem. Now let's talk about logistics, a failure to give people proper ID cards, multiple voter cards, so we can't even be sure that we have reached the 80 million who are poor. I think I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts about this and for the quick math that you have done about how we are indeed capable of feeding the ones that are most in need. Now, you spoke about how the lockdown has perhaps slowed the trend of what we would have seen were it not for the lockdown. So in your view, we needed to lock down. However, I think the point that Chidi made earlier on about how, the protocol is you test, you trace, you treat, that hasn't happened. So I'd like to come to Chidi. Here we are sort of like in a catch-22 situation. We need to stop people from going out there in order to stem the spread and in order to test. That is not happening. People need to go out in order to earn a living. That in itself is not happening. We've also been reminded that the informal sector contributes 60% of the economy. How do we keep the economy functioning in this time, whilst ensuring that the people who are the largest contributors to this are not jeopardized health-wise? What will be, from the civil perspective, what will be your opinion?
This will be well, the people who know a lot about the economy on this panel, and so I don't claim any expertise in this. But if you wanted to start dealing with this stuff properly in Nigeria, first thing, dismantle this so-called presidential task force. You cannot have a collection of politicians and propagandists running the presidential task force. It does not work. There is no scientist, by the way, in this whole thing. The SGF is a lawyer. Lai Mohammed is a propagandist and a former lawyer. And you could go on. The NCDC, it does public health, not parasitology or virology, right? So it needs the help of scientists. Get scientists involved. That's the first thing. Appoint a scientific advisor to this process. Now, why is that such a difficult thing? Number two, it needs presidential leadership. President Buhari lacks bandwidth. Why don't you get Oshibajo involved? You need high-level governmental coordination here. That is failing. That is non-existent. The people need to hear that the government cares. When they feel that, people will lock in. But if you're locking me up and shooting me for going out, demilitarize the situation, that will be a heck of a lot of help. And then make the process surgical. At the moment, it is generalized and run on fear and not on science. I do understand closing down on gatherings, but social distancing in Nigeria will not work. I'd like to see, for instance, army engineers deployed to provide water in Bauchi, deployed to provide water in Birnin-Kebbi. Now, if you are doing that and you're telling people hand wash, it makes sense. They see evidence that government is behaving like it cares. You're not going to be able to cover all of the country doing that. But if the CBN is debiting banks compulsorily for contributions that they have not made nor authorized and which their boards don't know about, claiming that the banks have contributed to the management of COVID, that is criminal government at the highest levels. And this really is the problem that we've got. I don't want to go on about this, but the irresponsibility going on cannot persuade anybody to take government seriously. And when government needs authority and is bleeding it in the way that we're doing, what you encourage is people resorting to DIY. I cannot tell the people who are hungry not to get food where they need it from. That because we are supposed to be protecting life, whether from the virus, from coronavirus or from hunger virus. Everyone is a virus. Or even from government virus. And bad government is the worst virus you can have in this situation. And at the moment, I want to go on record and say we've got terrible government. It's got to prove itself, with the exception, I repeat, of Lagos. Thank you.
Thank you. You've said you cannot prevent the people who need food from going out to get it. Is that an implicit support for what I earlier described as the criminality that we see? And is that a solution, or is there some other solution that could assuage the hunger and the hunger virus that you allude to?
I don't know about implicit support of criminality. I frankly cannot call somebody who goes out to get food under this situation a criminal. In a country in which we have refused to hold accountable people who rig elections, We've refused to hold accountable people who kill others. As I told you, 18 Nigerians have been shot to death by uniformed assets. Not one person has, in the right places, has said that is a crime. Not one person has said we've got to put a stop to this. What everybody's talking about is poor people trying to help themselves from things that government should be providing to things that government should be providing, which it is not. And somebody has got to call out government that because it's failing, poor people are helping themselves. That is not criminality. What is criminal is government refusing to do what it should do.
Great. So since we're talking about accountability, let me move to Kyari. You know, the question a number of people have been asking when we look at the support, and indeed, I think it is a good thing that a number of both corporate bodies and individuals have come out to see the ways in which they can help the situation of the people who cannot go out to earn their living. But then a number of people have been asking, the companies pay multiple taxes. Companies pay education tax. The oil companies pay all sorts of levies, including NDDC levy. And now today, the same private sector is being called upon to build hospitals, donate medical supplies, and so on. And, you know, I wonder, is accountability being demanded, you know, on account from the side of the companies and perhaps individuals? Or, you know, questions being asked as to what all the levies and the tax is funding. And is there a better model for the government to provide, you know, to enable the private, more involvement of private sector participation in Nigeria?
Thank you, Prof. More involvement is one thing, but what we see from the point of view of the private sector, if you are a formal company, you know that at the end of the year when you do your financial report, 2% of your profit before tax goes to education levy, 1% of your PBT goes to what is called a technology levy. And one of the things that baffles me is that nobody in the private sector is holding government accountable as to what happens to those monies that have been set aside. If you are in the banking sector, you even have another huge chunk that go, you know, that is being deducted. But the key is that this incident, this pandemic, COVID-19, probably is going to give a wake-up call to the nation for us as citizens, whether you are in the private sector or whether you are in the informal sector. Citizens need to hold account or accountability of governance. Governance is not what the average Nigerian thinks. Governance is what you actually do in terms of meeting the basic needs. To be the local government chairman means that you need to make sure that water is running, the streets are cleaned, things work rather than what we see on a day-to-day basis in Nigeria. So essentially, the key, I mean, I list 3 basic things that would be required from the local government councillor to the Federal Executive Council, and that is that it is in their informed best self-interest for things to function in this country. 2, they need to look for incentives if they want to engage the private sector. I think Lagos state government has done that to a certain extent. Even the distribution of commodities or meals and things like that, it's done in conjunction with the private sector. I know of certain foundations, some of the young people have also been pushing and doing things on their own. The third is transparency. Whatever you do, you should do it in an open book manner. And unfortunately, these are things that we have not been holding our elected officials to. And I hope and pray that it will change post this pandemic. Now, I think Atedo mentioned 1918 deaths in Nigeria. It was slightly over 400,000 in a population of 17 million, 8 in the northern protectorates and 8 in the southern, 8.5 or something like that, which basically means that 2.3 or 2.4% of the population got wiped out by the pandemic. If you extrapolate to this, it means that over 5 million people may die as a result of this if nothing is done. So granted, we need to have some level of control or
I think we've lost.
oh wow,
We lost it.
yeah, minimization of this by having some of the practices that people have. It is not going to be an automatic cut and paste, but we need to do something about this. And at the same time, as Chidi had mentioned, it is not just political operatives or political appointees that should be in the task force. It should be a task force of experts. Even if you will have the political task force, you need something that would actually be informed by the science of this, and also plan for the future. This is the time that there is a need for sense of urgency. We have a saying in my language where you do not go out and purchase a puppy when somebody calls for today being the hunting day. You got to plan for it. And I think this is a lesson for us as a society to see how we.
Okay. I think Kerry has gone off, so I'd like to thank him. But then move quickly to, yes, Kerry, sorry. Yes, you want to round up? Yes, please.
So how we can propel Nigeria into a nation that is responsible, accountable, and be able to change the lives of the average citizen. I think some of the conversation that was shared by Dr. Imo is great, because anything owned by government can easily be run down. But once it is in the private, it's managed privately, even if the government share is huge, but it is run privately, you would see more benefits accruing to government. And by that, we need to invest in 2 or 3 basic things. One is healthcare, second is education, and some of the basic infrastructure. Let's start with light manufacturing, nothing sophisticated. And then we move on gradually. And
okay, well, let me thank Kerry and then move on to Imo. Just to ask, earlier on, Imo, you had spoken about the NLNG model.
Via the provision of incentives and so on and so forth. Sorry, I've been cutting off. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Thanks.
Prof.
I think we caught that. Thank you very much for your contributions. Imo, earlier on in your opening, you spoke about the LNG model for revenue management. Now it appears that outside of these various contributions, the whole nation is now depending on the dividends from this. Well, that's an exaggeration, but nearly true, from this to survive. Is there something that is stopping us as a nation from adopting this model for all other areas of the oil industry?
Well, just before I address that specifically, I want to tap into, I think, the point, your earlier question about accountability on tax paid.
Please.
The oil industry, given its so large effect and contribution to Nigeria's economy, the taxation system in the oil industry is 85%. Many people don't realize that. The producing companies pay 85% where for their petroleum profits tax, whereas the ordinary companies pay 30%. This besides other taxations, education fund, and so on and so forth, NDDC. What we should be asking ourselves and the country, what are we doing with the 85% tax paid by producing companies? Each company is obliged and obligated to pay 20% royalty on every barrel it produces. And on top of that, we don't worry about the tax paid by the companies at the end of the year when you do your books, 85%. That's huge, that's humongous. Now, what are we doing as a nation with this tax collected from oil producing companies? Now, back to this question you're asking me now as to the model of NLNG. What's stopping us? Nothing. I believe it was Thierry or somebody earlier on that mentioned that the apparent lack of trust of government for the private sector. If we would trust ourselves, if we would ensure that we do the right things, the best model, which has been practiced by, as I said earlier on, by those countries that have been quite successful in how they manage their oil assets, is let government get out of the industry. Regulate, tax, give all the rules, but let the private sector run the business. And Kerry just mentioned this a minute ago. The private sector has a track record of how they run their business. And not only that, being not part of government, it is very easy for government to come back, and each time the private sector steps out of line, there are ways to call them to order. But when a government entity is in charge of, and is a player, as well as an operator, it's difficult for government to call itself to order. What do you do when a government entity does not pay its tax? Who do you arrest? These are issues that we need to look into seriously. And unless and until we are ready to do this, we again keep fooling us. We do not need government to play in this sector. Let government create a level playing field, oversee, supervise, regulate, give all the rules, but let the private sector do the show. And as you rightly point out, NLNG has come to the rescue, or the proceeds out of NLNG has been very useful in these very difficult times. That's from 49%. If the private sector had 100%, you can imagine the returns could easily be a lot more based on the taxation we would have been getting. We need to learn from what is happening now. We have not learned our lessons yet.
Great. Thank you very much. So, very interesting conversation so far, and a couple of things are starting to stand out. And in trying to wrap up this part of it there, I would just like to paraphrase something that Chidi said earlier on, that really what we're contending with really is about human society and how we organize this in a disorganized society. And a number of things have come out there. You know, we've spoken about the governance structure, and governance not only in terms of meeting the basic needs, but also in creating the context in which you know, private sector can thrive and then contribute to the situation we find ourselves in. I think that in general, the panelists have spoken about the need for more responsible behavior on the parts of the different stakeholders, if I may, in this economy there. So at this point, I would like to move quickly to the question and answer session. There are quite a number of questions that have come up there, and I'll be directing the questions to the panelists that have been so asked the specific questions there. So I'll begin with Mr. Atedo Peterside. Someone is asking how your foundation's COVID-19 think tank is enabling non-profit organizations as well as social sector players to curtail the spread of COVID-19 at the community level. Is there something specific that is being done in this regard? And I'll just add the second question. Another person salutes your benevolence and your proactive steps with this think tank, but then he's asking, how do we ensure that we don't allow this crisis to waste? Please, Atedo.
Yes, thank you. I think the first one, let me explain that. There was a reason why our foundation formed a think tank. If this was Germany, there will be no need for a think tank because the government has already prepared. There are blueprints for emergency and so on. It's because this was Nigeria, and if there were blueprints for an emergency of this size, I myself have never seen them before, cannot find them. So we were now fighting a battle, and at the same time drawing up a blueprint on how to fight such battles. So one of the first things we produced was a 7-page coronavirus alert, which was a 7-page document, which if you give to every governor, and you give to every commissioner, and you give to Speaker House of Rep, and you give to everybody in the House of Rep, every senator, every House of Assembly member, LG, local government chairman, and councillors. In 7 pages, they will understand roughly 95% of what they need to know about COVID-19. We saw that gap because we saw lots of documents, 200-page document from X, 93-page document from Lagos, from London Business School, 200 pages from somebody else. No councillor in an LGA in a rural area in Bauchi can handle that. So we created a 7-page alert and summary on coronavirus, which we translated into Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. So it's in English, Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba, and given out to the authorities and also disseminated via the internet to anybody who wants to care to print it and send it out. That is filling a knowledge gap. If you give people knowledge, they can save themselves. And already there have been interactions with LGA chairmen who are positive, who have understood and are taking steps to protect the community. So that was the gap. The second thing we produced was, in that confusion I've already mentioned, people started spending money. How can you start spending money when there's no agreement on what to buy? So we came up with a press release that mentioned 7 things that Nigeria needs. So we are trying to bring some order and logic. Please believe me, it's not because I think there's anything wrong with those in government, federal, state, or LGA. It's because of an old English saying that the person in the eye of a storm cannot see clearly. If you are the health minister, you're a health commissioner, and you're in the eye of this storm, you need help. When you're in the eye of the storm, there's so much dust in your eyes that you appreciate think tanks or people like that telling you, hey, you made a mistake here, you made a mistake there, we saw a vacuum here, here's what you need. And I can proudly say that almost all of those people, except 1 or 2, have taken our material, thanked us, blessed us, because we were looking at what they were doing and identifying gaps. And talking about wasting this crisis, I was surprised the person who asked this question. For me, the number one manner that we must not waste this crisis is to fail to build an elite consensus on how to take our country forward. Because part of the problem is that until now, people felt so confident that the elite will advocate for all kinds of crazy things. Indeed, when I gave a speech at the 25th summit dinner for the NESG, Silver Jubilee in Abuja last year, I made it very clear that it's almost as if the elite were scared to elect leaders who were truly knowledgeable and competent, because such leaders won't allow you to read the economy in your favor. So from top to bottom, from LGA to states to everywhere, to Senate and House of Rep, even the elite were always in a hurry to find persons that they thought did not know enough, whom they could then manipulate for their own benefit. We've got to agree that the way not to waste this crisis is to bring some merit into the system, because Germany can fight this fight because they have some merit in their system. China can fight this fight because they have merit in their system. We see in soccer, there's an elite consensus to fill that first 11. As soon as you leave soccer, in most other activities, there is no elite consensus on a need to fill that first 11. So we pay that price. We pay it in every sphere, and we will also pay that price in this COVID-19 fight. Because if we had a first 11 out there, perhaps we would make progress faster. Even I would just end by pointing fingers at myself. What if I told you that even our own ANAP Foundation COVID-19 think tank, we have done things that Nigeria has refused to do. Who is the deputy or vice of that think tank? He is Abubakar Siddiq Mohammed, who is a researcher in Zaria, who knows more about research, up-to-date research locally and globally than the chairman. So the chairman turns to him every day for advice. Even in this same think tank that started on 22nd of March, we have had to make some little changes to the team. Even a football team in the World Cup final, when the coach looks and sees that one player is a weakness, he makes a change. Nigeria will insist that the same team we picked to fight COVID-19 must fight it, in spite of glaring weaknesses in 1 or 2 places. You don't do that in soccer. We all demand remove that player because he's a liability to the team. Liverpool Football Club failed to win Champions League 1 year because of a bad goalkeeper. And let me tell you why I have hope. I'll end with this. Sometimes there are miracles, and I'll use soccer. I think it was 1992. Denmark hurriedly assembled a team to replace somebody, and they came to the competition unprepared. And guess what? They won the European Nations Cup. So we can win this fight, but it's not by waiting for governments. If I was going to wait for government, I wouldn't set up a think tank. Like I've said, almost everything that the government can do, the private sector can do, the elite can do. So why would I be sitting down waiting for government? Did I wait for government before I jumped on this program today? Did I wait for government before I went on AIT? People send me messages saying I should tell Buhari to speak. Excuse me, I tell them, you go and speak yourself. You have a PhD, you have a master's degree. This is the time to get up and be counted. Your mates are speaking in Germany. They're speaking in Vietnam. They're speaking in the USA. You get out there, open your mouth and speak and convince your neighbors, convince everybody, help the poor. So I will end there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that you spoke about your foundation getting others involved, and perhaps that in part addresses Chidi's concern about the involvement of scientists in the presidential or in the fight against COVID there. And somebody indeed had commented and asked, what the government is doing to reach out to brilliant Nigerians in diaspora to be part of the crisis solution. So I'm glad, like as you just said, that Edo, that we're not waiting for that to happen. And through your foundation, you're reaching out to other people there. A quick question for Imo. Somebody is asking whether as a nation, we should be focusing on oil or on gas. Perhaps you want to take that quickly, and I'll take a few other comments before we quickly wrap up.
Sure. Should we be focusing on oil and gas? In fact, geologists and geophysicists claim that Nigeria is more so nothing's wrong with focusing on both. However, you lost me?
Okay, yeah, that's
However,
complete.
okay. Nigeria is seen as a gas province more than an oil province, so we should be focusing on both. However, gas is cleaner than oil. And in this day and age, when we are talking about the environment, perhaps we should spend a lot more time and effort on developing our vast gas resources. We have underdeveloped that resource, and I would say we should spend a bit more time developing our gas resource more than our oil resource at this moment.
Great. Thank you very much there. Chidi, I don't know whether you're able to answer this question, but somebody is asking, really, how long can Nigeria afford this lockdown? Is that something you're able to answer?
I don't know whether I can help the person. We could not afford a lockdown from the first day. But this is my personal opinion. I'll just say this very quickly. In 1926, after the pandemic of 1 century ago, which has been referred to here, in 1926, the colonialists adopted the Quarantine Ordinance, which was premised on making sure that poor Black people in colonial government did not come to infect white people who felt they were superior to us. In 2020, our elites in Nigeria, speaking about elite consensus, are using that same colonial ordinance to make sure that poor Nigerians don't infect them with our inconveniences. That is, for me, the metaphor for our problem.
Great. Thank you very much there. So we're getting close to the end now, and I know that in the course of this conversation, a lot of suggestions have been made and solutions preferred. But I would just like to quickly ask whether there are any parting comments that each of the panelists would want to leave the audience with, or suggestions for how we can more adequately tackle this fight. So I'll begin with Dr. Itueli. Any parting comments?
Yes, sure.
Yes, please.
Sure, thank you. As we are coming to an end of this program, I'd like to point out that I see the post-COVID-19 period as a time for a new beginning. After we would have used this period to press the reset button, this country certainly needs a reset nationally. We now need to rethink who we are as a people, as a nation, how we associate and how we relate with each other. Above all, we need to optimize the natural resources the good Lord has blessed us with, because we've not been doing this. A lesson from how China managed the lockdown in Wuhan is the need for us to know exactly how many we are in this country. And not only how many we are, we need to be able to identify ourselves one by one. Somebody mentioned earlier that it was very easy for China in the lockdown, if you break it using IT or some other method, facial recognition, to identify each person. Since the 1950s, have we been able to have a true census of Nigeria? We have not. Do we know exactly how many we are in this country and where we are? We do need to do that now, more than at any other time at all. As I think Atedo or somebody mentioned, we need to start preparing for the next catastrophe that may threaten us. We don't even have our national ID scheme. It has been ongoing for many years. We spent so much and it's not been fully rolled out yet. Now, this is especially true for the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. We need a reappraisal of how we have managed the resources in this sector of the economy. For this, in my opinion, we need a small strategic team of experience and new blood. These are dedicated to rescuing the industry and devoid of ethnicity or politics. We need to chart the way forward. And it's this small strategic team of experience and new blood that I'll say should be mandated to do this. For the immediate foreseeable future, we all know that the oil and gas industry will be key to getting Nigeria out of the problem we're in. This should be simultaneous, this is my suggestion, to the same problem we've been talking about year in, year out, way out of oil, alternate to oil. We pay lip service to it, but we're not doing very well. We need to act quickly, and in my opinion, in true national interest. Thus, we need a new governance and fiscal regime in this industry. If we do not do that, investment will not come. That's the take I'll give out to the public and to Nigeria as we head out of this COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Atedo, please. You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
I think I have focused so much on what we should do. And it's dangerous sometimes not to say what not do at the same time, because some people may still try and do the wrong thing by mistake. So I will end by saying what we should not do. Please, please, please. The most successful countries in this COVID-19 fight were Singapore, China, South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam. They won this fight by organizing themselves to be able to test, trace, treat. Now let me warn, this is not a money fight. If it was a money fight, USA would win. They have the most resources in the world, and so far they're losing this fight. If it was a money fight, UK would do well. Please, all of you, join me in begging Central Bank of Nigeria. This is not a money fight. Worse still, each time we are just about succeeding to get the rich through a social consensus, elite consensus, to now take on the task of feeding the poor. Yesterday, I got to know that Mr. Leostan Eke of Xerox Computers and Conga is now feeding 7,000 Nigerians a day. Each time he starts doing that, Central Bank announces there is 15 trillion or 1 trillion or 2 trillion for businessmen. Some of them abandon the poor and run to go and try and get their share of that money. This is not the time for that. When an emergency, the priority now is to look after the poor, and the rich must join to look after the poor first. Central Bank should shut those taps off. There's nothing like long-term capex investment under a global lockdown. No manufacturer can supply you anything of note. It's for grabbing emergency supplies and saving lives. So please, 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 let's not distract people by offering billions of naira in the midst of all this for businessmen. US is throwing big sums of money around. Guess what? Every day in New York, you're hearing 750 dead, 800 dead. Let's not copy the wrong thing. It's not the money fight. This is the fight involving an elite consensus to cleverly organize a society and minimize the risk for everybody, buy some time, and then test and treat. So I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Very passionate appeal on your part to people to join you in pleading with the central bank. I'm sure a number of people will join in this plea that you have just made. Prof. Chidi, please, any closing remarks?
Thank you very much for this, to BusinessDay as well, and to you, Madam. Can I just say this quickly? First of all, in terms of law, can we retire the Quarantine Act? and make use of the NCDC Act, which Nigeria adopted 2 years ago. It's up to date. It enables us to mobilize, number two, what Atedo was referring to, which is assets. And assets are just not cash. Now, every Nigerian citizen is an asset. If Nigerians get the impression that their country cares about us, we will all become assets. And every one of us will contribute to making sure this thing doesn't work. The native doctors, the juju priests, everybody will bring what they have to the table. And that means, thirdly, therefore, and this is where I wouldn't say I disagree with Atido, but I'll say I compliment him. I don't think I will let the president off so easily and Nigerians, so you know what, don't wait for Buhari to speak, use your voice. I'm sorry, no. There is only one president at any point in time, and that carries weight. When leadership fails you in a pandemic, you are finished. Nobody can save you because people don't know who to believe. And that is why the voice of leadership at this particular point matters. And telling me that it doesn't matter doesn't quite cut it for me. Two more things quickly. One is the point about data. In Nigeria, we don't manage figures properly. We always rig numbers. And that includes the numbers we are getting at the moment. NCDC is telling us about the numbers who have tested positive, but not the numbers that they have tested. We are being told we have a testing capacity of this and that. We are not told the numbers that we have tested. And that is because propagandists are managing this thing in the name of politics. Can we do better than that? People need the truth. And finally, in terms of what Kiari said, talking about the future, Nigeria is being renegotiated as we speak. State governments are taking over roles that federal government thought belonged to them, closing down airports, shutting down maritime borders, and the precedents in terms of our constitutional arrangements and structures being set now will be very important as to legacies from this thing. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Prof, underscoring the importance of leadership in this context. Kiari, please, any closing remarks from you?
Yes, Prof. I want to take this opportunity to thank Business Day for granting us the opportunity to discuss, have a conversation about not just this pandemic, but about the whole country, about Nigeria. I have four quick items. And the first one is what Atedo had mentioned, which is to attack this issue in a unified manner. And what I mean by that is that both the public sector, the private sector, and to that extent, even individuals can play their role. And if you are able to feed one other person, please go ahead and do it. We can work all these details. In fact, talking about feeding, I understand that in the last 1 or 2 weeks in Lagos, prices of vegetables went up. Meanwhile, in places like Jos and Benue and Kano, vegetables are rotting because there was no opportunity of evacuating them out. The presidential task force need to pay attention to some of those critical, essential things in terms of the logistics element. These are urgent matters that need to be addressed. So together we can fight and win this war. Second, the issue of data and identity. I think we've been working with this National Identity Management Commission and so on and so forth. I think we have not done an important element of this, which is that there are data everywhere, and we need to just have willpower to consolidate that database. And in some cases, that is segued into the third item, which is innovation. We have a number of hundreds and hundreds, thousands of Nigerians that are doing a lot of things in the fintech, AI space, in the technology space. We have done quite a number of things, and I think we can encourage them by giving them the necessary incentives, investing in them to bring out solutions we can actually take and run with. And of course, naturally, the fourth is the future. The governance is too important to be left to just public sector. Governance means every one of us need to be there, and every one of us need to be around the table to chart a way forward of transforming this country into a functioning nation with humanity embedded in it. Because if we continue to fight, we will not be able to have the energy and the resources to move ourselves to a higher plateau. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So at this junction, I'd like to thank Business Day for putting together this digital dialogue, for all the participants that have logged on to this discourse this afternoon. Your comments are well noted. For those questions that we didn't take, it was because in the course of the conversation, they had been answered. And to the panelists, Atedo Peter Side, Imo Isweli, Chidi Odinkalu, and Kiari Buka, it's been an absolute delight to facilitate such a rich discussion in which you have both brought your perspectives into, shared your perspectives on how we can collectively not only fight, but win this battle. So thank you very much, everybody, and do have a good afternoon whilst keeping safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Lost audio. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Frank. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Frank.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Atedo, thank you. Kiari and Chidi, thank you all.
Thank you so much.
ever so much, sir.
Bye-bye.
Much appreciated.
Bye. Have a good day and stay safe.